concerns or anything that you need to get off your chest before we get started? Okay. Anybody? Anything? The Rho Kappa induction is next Thursday. Rho Kappa is meeting tomorrow during Bulldog Block to plan that out. Just received these in the mail. Okay. The Civil War. Okay, we seem to have been building to this for a while, and the spark, the thing that gets the Civil War going, is the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860. Lincoln wins the election, but doesn't win any state south of the Mason-Dixon line. Lincoln is a Northern president, and that is why the South secedes. That is why in December 1860, South Carolina is going to be the first state to declare that they are seceding from the Union. They refuse to be governed by a president seemingly of a section. Of course, it turned out that way because the Republicans were united as a Northern anti-slave expansion party, but the Democrats had split apart. So poor old Stephen Douglas thought he was going to walk to the nomination, and he does get the Democratic nomination, but the Southern Democrats refused to follow him. They were angered by his statement in the Freeport Doctrine during the Lincoln-Douglas debates when he told Lincoln, yeah, you can exclude slavery from a territory despite the Dred Scott decision. So Southerners remembered that, and the Southern Democrats had nominated another candidate, John C. Breckinridge, who was the sitting vice president. He was James Buchanan's vice president. He was 39 years old. And then you had another political party here. They were called the Constitutional Union Party. Think of them as the Clay Compromise Party. These guys rallied around the idea of a compromise. Surely a compromise could avert secession and the Civil War. Now here's the thing. Lincoln is elected in November 1860, but he's not inaugurated until March 4th, 1861. And that's when all heck breaks loose, is between the election and the inauguration. These deep South states all secede while James Buchanan is president. And James Buchanan does nothing to stop it. He believes that he does not have the authority to do anything. I can't force the South to stay here. And so they leave. That's universally why James Buchanan is ranked at the bottom of presidential rankings. He's either at the bottom or second from the bottom. To me, I think he's the worst president we've ever had. So those southern states are already gone by the time Abraham Lincoln is inaugurated March 4th, 1861. Lincoln was elected without the beard. Him and his vice president, Hannibal Hamlin. We had a guy named Hannibal as our vice president. So the rule applies. People with stupid names don't get elected president. I didn't say anything about vice president. We've had a Garrett Hobart in our past. We've had a Schuyler Colfax in our past. We had a guy run for vice president named Theodore Frelinghuysen. So he was the Democratic, or the Democratic nominee in... Oh, no, he was Clay's running mate. He was the Whig nominee in 1844. It was Clay Frelinghuysen. So anyway, Lincoln comes in, and he's already got a mess on his hands. Now, in the period between November 1860 and March 1861, there is an attempt at compromise. And it comes from the venerable senator of Kentucky. No, Henry Clay did not rise from the grave and offer another compromise to smooth out sectional differences. It is left to Clay's successor, John J. Crittenden, to propose a solution. Now, before we get into the Civil War and the border states and the advantages of both, the disadvantages of both sides, I think it is important that you guys know that there was a compromise on the table when Lincoln took the oath of office. This was the compromise that was proposed. It's called the Crittenden Compromise. Here's what Crittenden proposed. 1. Take the Missouri Compromise line and extend it all the way to the Pacific Ocean. 3630 line all the way to the Pacific. But wait! Roger Taney declared in the Dred Scott case that the Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional, and you can't have lines depicting where you can and can't take slaves. Crittenden's got an answer for that. You make a constitutional amendment putting the Missouri Compromise in the Constitution. Now it becomes constitutional because it's in the Constitution. And you make another constitutional amendment that forbids you from repealing the Missouri Compromise amendment. So an amendment to forbid amendments that can never be amended. So what you're doing is you're permanently establishing a line. And Crittenden says, and here's the key, slavery would be open in any territory south of the 3630 line that America owns or may own in the future. Why do you? There's land down there. That's right. As a matter of fact, if you look at a map, there's a whole lot of land down there, all the way down there. Surely the United States would not want to acquire any of that territory. I mean, surely there's no evidence that America may be conspiring to acquire land south of the Texas border, right? What had America already done? The Ostend Manifesto, Cuba, the filibustering expeditions of William Walker into Nicaragua. The evidence is it's clear that America is willing to do whatever it takes to acquire more territory. And people began to fear that if the Crittenden Compromise were put in place, what was to stop the United States from acquiring all the land all the way down to Tierra del Fuego? But here was the thing. Southern politicians said, okay, we'll go with this. Sure, they get a good deal. Northern politicians said, sure, we'll go with it. The only person who did not support the Crittenden Compromise was the person who mattered. Abraham Lincoln rejected the compromise. Why? To prevent that. That's exactly it. That is exactly it. You go back to his rhetoric. You go back to what he wrote, what he said. A house divided against itself cannot stand. That divides the house permanently. You're creating two separate, distinct entities. And Lincoln says, no, I reject that. And so the last chance, to use a legal term, the last clear chance to avoid a civil war is lost. Lincoln becomes president. He delivers his inauguration address. Oh yeah, by the way, people just go bananas. Secession crisis, South Carolina. Okay, here are your first states to declare secession. Then you had another group of states declare. Buchanan, powerless. South leaves. Yeah, I always think of Nero fiddling while Rome burned. Buchanan sitting there going, "Oh, gee whiz, guys, what do I do?" Lincoln's inauguration address, he tries to solve the problem through rhetoric. He says in his inauguration address, now he's got a beard, I have no purpose, directly or indirectly, to interfere with the institution of slavery in the states where it exists. So he's basically echoing the free soil mantra. I believe I have no lawful right to do so, and I have no inclination to do so. He says that. Slavery's fine right where it is. I just don't want it expanding. So South, come on back. And the South rejects it. Britain Compromise is rejected. And in April 1861, Southern forces trying to remove Union forces from Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor are going to open fire on Fort Sumter. Lincoln says, I now am the commander-in-chief. I need to use my power as commander-in-chief to call up volunteers. I can now blame the South for starting the war. They fired the first shot. Lincoln calls up troops, and those upper South states, Tennessee, North Carolina, Virginia, Arkansas, when they hear that Lincoln is using Army troops to go into the South, that's when they secede. So that's why you had two waves of secession. Two waves of secession. These guys seceded when Lincoln was elected. These guys seceded after Lincoln calls up troops to defend Fort Sumter. The question is going to be, what about these guys? What is a border state? What is it? When I say border state, aside, oh, it's on the border. Yeah.
They're giving troops to both sides.
Oh, they are. Yeah, Maryland has about as many Confederate forces as they do Union forces. It's interesting if you go to Gettysburg and you look at the, where the war dead are buried there. You've got Maryland Confederate regiments, Maryland Union regiments. It's very interesting. Yeah, but what is a border? How would I define a border state? It was only the first item. Quick, look around like you've got it. Border states are states that have slavery, that did not secede from the Union. They are on the border between North and South. But why don't they secede? Yeah. Pressure from the Union. As a matter of fact, one of Lincoln's first things that he has to do, besides dealing with the Fort Sumter issue, is how do I keep these border states in the Union? Well, he's going to have to exercise a great deal of power. He declares Missouri to be under military rule and dismisses the Missouri state legislature. Kentucky declares neutrality. They're like the Switzerland of the thing. Delaware? Who cares about Delaware? What the heck? 900 slaves there. West Virginia isn't even a state yet. It's still part of Virginia. So the big concern for Lincoln is Maryland. Why?
Maryland is kind of like enveloping D.C.
Yes, if Maryland leaves the Union, D.C. is lost. As a matter of fact, here you go. Here's a good timeline. Fort Sumter is fired upon, I think, April 15th, 14th or 15th, 1865. By April 19th, or 61, sorry. April 15th, 1861. By April 19th, 1861, the boxes in the White House and the Capitol building and the Supreme Court are packed. They are ready to move out. There is an evacuation contingency plan in place. That's how dangerous this time period was. Lincoln feared that Maryland was going to secede from the Union. And he had reason to believe that. He had reason to believe this. Okay? What is Lincoln going to do to keep Maryland in the Union?
Arrest people that are Confederate sympathizers.
Or even suspected Confederate sympathizers. You don't even have to have any proof. If you're just accused of being a Confederate, you could be arrested, not shown the evidence, held in perpetuum. What is that? Suspension of habeas corpus. That is how Lincoln keeps Maryland in the Union. Now, the reason why Lincoln believed that Maryland was a tinderbox ready to explode was because as troops were being ferried from New York City to Washington, D.C. to protect the Capitol, and then ultimately they were heading down to South Carolina, they came through Baltimore that week of April 15th. These troops were coming through Baltimore, Maryland, on their way to D.C. and ultimately down to Fort Sumter. When the troops arrived in Baltimore, they had to switch trains. The train line came in where the Jones Falls Expressway is today, and the train line ended at President and Pratt. There's a train station there. There's a museum there today. Well, this is why there's a museum there. Those Union troops had to get off the train at President and Pratt. They stopped off at Moe's for a little bit of seafood. And then they had to march down Pratt Street down to Camden Yards to pick up the other train. When they got off the train at President and Pratt and began marching down the street, the crowd attacked them, and the Union troops started firing into the crowd. And it turned into a riot. So Lincoln believed that Maryland was on the verge of rebellion and needed to do something quickly. So he issued an executive order, suspend habeas corpus, arrest suspected Confederate sympathizers, and most notoriously, prevent the Maryland legislature from meeting. How did he do it? He arrested members of the Maryland state legislature, including people from Anne Arundel County, because the secessionists had the votes to get Maryland out of the Union. They were ready to go. It was close. The vote was going to be close. But Lincoln believed that the secessionists had just enough to get Maryland out of the Union. So Lincoln arrests members of the state assembly and, as a wartime measure, temporarily moves the capital of Maryland from Annapolis to Frederick. Why Frederick? Why move the capital here? This is not a line. So, hold on a second. Think about it. Why move it from Annapolis to Frederick? Huh? What's right on the bay? Yeah? Okay, definitely. I'm thinking strategically, if the South was going to supply Annapolis, yeah, sure, yeah. It's further north and it's further west. Where is Frederick? What do you see when you arrive in Frederick? What's like right in front of you? The mountains, the Catoctin Mountains. Why would Lincoln want to place the center of Maryland government among the mountains of western Maryland? Possibly. Yes, it's the hillbillies who don't trust the planter elites. Exactly. Those mountain whites that I talked about. They don't like any authority. They especially don't like the planter elites who seem to be running these southern governments. So Lincoln puts the capital of Maryland in and around pro-Union people out in Frederick, Maryland. Now, why does Lincoln take this action? Why does he take any action? Because he's president of the United States and he feels like it? Because he wants to end slavery? Because he wants to stick it to Maryland?
Preserve the Union at all costs.
This sums up Lincoln's goal very simply. 3 words. Save the Union. Suspend habeas corpus? I'm trying to save the Union. Arrest politicians? I'm trying to save the Union. Send troops into the South? I'm trying to save the Union. Destroy cotton plantations? I'm trying to save the Union. Free the slaves? I'm trying to save the Union. That's his goal. My paramount object in this struggle is to save the Union, and is not either to save or destroy slavery. If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that. What I do about slavery, and read anything else, what I do during this war, I do because I believe it helps to save the Union. And what I forbear, what I choose not to do, I choose not to do because I do not believe it would help save the Union. So Lincoln could couch all of his actions in saving the Union. All right. Who's got the advantage in this war? Who's got the advantage? The North. Why?
They have more people. They got
everything. Yeah. You've got more people, 2 to 1, more people. You've got industry, factories. You can manufacture anything and everything you need for a war. You've got infrastructure, roads, canals, railroads, all tied together that you can ship troops and supplies anywhere. You've got raw materials to be able to do it. You've got iron, you've got coal, you've got foodstuffs from Northwestern farmers to feed the troops. You've got anything and everything you need to fight a war. On paper, this should not have taken more than a couple of months. And indeed, most people in the Union believed that this would be, in April, believed that this would be over with by the end of the summer. They were convinced one battle would do it. Here are your northern advantages. 22 million Union, 9 million Confederate. Guys, I'm no genius, but I can count. If you kill everyone on a 1-to-1 ratio, the Union wins. And you know what? You know why Ulysses S. Grant was a successful general? Because he too could count. Factories, 110,000 to 18,000. Value of goods produced, 1.5 billion to 155 million. 70-30. Railroad, Union to Confederate. 17-1. Textile manufacturing. 32-1. Firearms manufacturing. The Union could create all the guns in the world. And pig iron for steel, 20-1 ratio. Guys, on paper, this should have been the Union in a walk. But like Chris Berman says, that's why they play the game. How is it that the South is able to last for 4 years? They're generals. The South's greatest advantage is their military leadership. They have brilliant generals. Why? Because Southern planters thought it was important to have military training and education. That's why a lot of Southern planters sent their sons to VMI and the Citadel and all these other military academies. That cavalier attitude, that idea of being a defender of the realm. Well, you needed to know how to defend the realm. That's why you went to military school. So the Southern generals were brilliant and able to, let's be honest, make chicken salad out of chicken crap. They could do more with less. What's the disadvantage of the North? If the North has all those advantages, what's the disadvantage? They've got crappy generals. They do. They're terrible. I mean, Lincoln goes through how many generals during the Civil War? Let me just run through them here. As commanders of the Army of the Potomac, you had, and I'm going to miss one or two here, John Pope, Halleck was in the West. John Pope, oh, God, let me run through the battle. Pope, McClellan, oh, wait, no, Ira, what's his face? Oh, yeah. Okay, you had McDowell, McClellan, Pope, McClellan, Burnside, Hooker, Meade, Grant. The South had Robert E. Lee, and Stonewall Jackson, and James Longstreet, but they worked together. So yeah, the North had lousy military leadership. The North also had to go into the South. The South had home field advantage. You were fighting on the South soil. The Southerners knew all the nooks and the crannies and the hills and the dales and the hedgerows and the treetops. The North, where are we going? I don't know. South. What is the South's great disadvantage? Besides the fact that they don't have anything to speak of.
Black.
Okay. Good.
They kind of rely on the North and they're not really diverse. They just grow all their cash crops. They don't really.
I thought you were gonna say it. They're not. The South has to live with whatever guns they've got, unless they can get them imported from Britain. I want to go back to what he said. They keep growing all these cash crops. It's cotton. But wait a minute. I thought James Hammond of South Carolina said during the Panic of 1857 that cotton was king. How is it not king?
You can't eat it.
You can't eat it. They did use it to do their textiles. But I don't know how that's a Southern disadvantage, though. The North doesn't buy it, but certainly Britain will buy it. You worried about soldiers sweating?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Bingo. They can't get the cotton out to the rest of the world because the Union blockaded the ports. So the one thing that made money for the South couldn't sell. And so the cotton just sat there. So the big disadvantage for the South is what they believe their strength was, cotton. I mean, that's rule of warfare. Take your opponent's strength and turn it into their weakness. And then the disadvantages for the North are the military leadership. Okay. Now, before we even get into the war, this provides Abraham Lincoln with an interesting opportunity. North and South found it very difficult to agree on a lot of things. And we find that during the Civil War, there are no Southern politicians around to block whatever the North wants to do. Lincoln decides he's going to take political advantage of the fact that the Republicans control both houses of Congress and the presidency, and that there are no Southerners there to block any kind of Republican legislation. So, in the midst of a civil war, Lincoln is going to push through an economic agenda as well. Now, what political party had Lincoln been a part of before he was a Republican? He had been a Whig. And what did the Whigs stand for? Well, they stood for whatever Henry Clay stood for. Well, what did he stand for? Okay. Yeah, but we don't know specifically what's in that. So what specifically did they stand for?
National bank.
A national bank. What else? Common currency. All right. Yeah. All right. So that kind of economic stuff. What else? Protective tariff. Railroads and internal infrastructure. Exactly. Lincoln is going to realize Henry Clay's dream. The Hamilton, Clay, Lincoln vision is the vision that wins out for the country. He could conduct this stuff virtually unopposed. And you see a transformation of the country during the Civil War. As a matter of fact, that's kind of the big question that College Board tends to focus on. How did the Civil War alter America? Alter it politically, alter it economically, alter it socially. How did it change government? How did it change money? How did it change people? It's during the war that you begin to see the industrialization of America. Guys, if you want to conduct a war, you need to do more than just make textiles. What do you need to make? Steel.
Weapons.
Weapons. Ammo. Everything. You need ships. You need other, and I'm not talking, and this is the first war where you start to see metal ships. So you've got, and you need the infrastructure to move all this stuff around. So it's during the Civil War and out of the needs of the Civil War that you begin to see the American economy shift from textiles to railroads. The thing that drives the American economy after the Civil War is railroad construction. And in order to get railroads built, yes, you need labor. Thank you, Irish immigrants. Thank you, Chinese immigrants, for building our railroads. But you need steel,
Oil.
oil,
Banks.
and investment. These are the guys who make out like bandits, starting with the Civil War and going all the way through the late 19th century. I love the story of Andrew Carnegie. Here's a guy, he arrived from Scotland in the 1840s as an immigrant with $8 in his pocket and started sweeping broom at a factory in Pittsburgh. By 1900, he sold United States Steel to J.P. Morgan for $1 billion.
He didn't think that JP Morgan would buy it.
He did. Andrew Carnegie in 1900 was the richest man in the world. And it was built on the back of steel that was used for railroads. And he got his start in that during the Civil War. As did Rockefeller, as did J.P. Morgan, as did a number of other people who were capitalists making money during the Civil War. People like, and these names all sound familiar, Cornelius Vanderbilt, Leland Stanford. Eventually, well, it wasn't during the Civil War, but eventually you're going to get to people like Henry Ford. So the first millionaires are created here. All right, now, what is the Republican Nationalist Economic Program? Well, one element is the Homestead Act. Yes.
Western expansion on free soil.
All right. Lincoln's primary goal is to make the West look like the North. You do that by getting Northerners to move out west. Well, now the steel plow's been invented, the mechanical reaper's been invented, so farming in the Midwest is viable. But how do you get people to leave their lives back east, where everything's nice and comfortable, and go take a risk in the Midwest? Huh? No, that's the California Gold Rush.
Told that everything's better over there.
Well, you can tell them everything's better over there, but
Fine.
well, are you gonna give these people money? What can you give them?
Land.
Land!
What?
180 acres free to every northern family that moves out west. Free. So long as you promise to cultivate it for 5 years, you get a farm. Free. Now, this is Lincoln's big idea. He is trying to encourage northern population to move west to tie the north and the west together. If they move out west and they become farmers, how can the government provide an opportunity for people to get out west easily and get their crops and supplies back east? In the same breath, Lincoln also signs the Transcontinental Railroad Act of 1862 to literally connect the West to the North. And if you're a farmer, move your stuff on the rail lines, send it back. If you're looking to travel west, hop on the train, or send it back east, head west. Now, the Transcontinental Railroad isn't completed until 1869, 79, somewhere in that ballpark. I forget which year, 7 or 9. I don't know. I got to go back and watch Wild Wild West with Will Smith. I think Ulysses S. Grant was at the driving of the Golden Spike at Promontory Point, Utah, before Kenneth Branagh showed up in his giant mechanical spider and started firing lasers at everybody. Wait, that didn't happen? All right. Now, you can encourage all these people to move out west and become farmers, so go be a farmer. Do you know how to be a farmer? Would you like to know how to be a farmer?
Sure.
How would I learn how to be a farmer? Go to school. But wait, what if there aren't any schools to teach farming?
Make a school.
Make a school. In the same breath, the Morrill Land Grant Act of 1862 is passed that establishes the formation of land grant colleges. Every state eventually gets one, at least. And the goal of the land grant colleges is to teach agriculture and mechanics, or agriculture and technology, or technology. Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, Texas A&M. I mean, eventually after the Civil War, the South gets theirs too. Even the state of Maryland. The University of Maryland, College Park, is a land grant college. What's one of the big programs they've got there? Yeah, don't they have like cows and stuff on the campus? I went to NC State University, a land grant college. When I drove to the history building, I had to drive through the cow pastures to get there, because they were teaching animal husbandry and veterinary medicine and food sciences. I mean, when you go to Penn State University, what's the big attraction at Penn State besides football? The creamery, the ice cream place. My son has already said he plans on going to Penn State for college to learn how to make ice cream. That's where Ben and Jerry learned how to make ice cream. Oh yeah, they ordered a correspondence course through Penn State University to learn how to make ice cream. They're from Vermont. I said they ordered a correspondence course. It came in the mail. They did the work, sent it in, got the credit. It wasn't online back in the 70s. You literally got the envelope in the mail with all the stuff. Completed, sent it in. So, you give people land, give them a way to get back and forth, teach them how to be farmers, and when they are successful, what can you do to them? Tax them. How are we going to finance the war? The income tax. And it's based on how much money you make. So if you're rich, you pay more. If you're poor, you pay less. That's what's called a graduated income tax. Lincoln says, this is just a temporary war measure. I got to start filing my taxes this month. Now, it was temporary for a bit, but eventually, in 1911, the 16th Amendment is ratified, putting the income tax in the Constitution. So this was done as a wartime measure as well. And in order to finance the war, you're going to need to have more money. More money means more problems. Now, how did the government, the independent treasury, which is divorced now from private banking, so you've got the federal deposits, how does the federal government print money? What's it based on? Take a piece of paper. Money. Why is it worth whatever it says it's worth? Not yet. At the time, what is the paper based on? Specie circular.
Gold.
Gold. Guys, people are not going to walk around with gold bricks in their pocket. So the government prints paper based off of the amount of gold they have on hand. But the Civil War is going to cost more than the amount of gold that's on hand. So you need to print more money.
Inflation.
So maybe they should make that money that's over and above the gold money look different. Maybe if we just colored it different. The greenback is created during the Civil War. The greenback is green to let everyone know that this is money above and beyond the gold supply. It is inflated currency. It is worth less. But they need physically more money. So the greenback is created. Wow, that was a lot of stuff. All right. How did the South and the North mobilize their troops?
The North used their trains.
I can't hear. What?
The North used the train systems to move around.
Well, they did, but how did you get... I've got troops. How did they get there? How did they know to be there? Okay. At first, both governments are going to ask for volunteers. But eventually you run out of volunteers, and you wind up having to draft soldiers. Some people believe that Lincoln was abusing his power as president in trying to save the Union. One thing they look at when claiming that is his use of troops. Now, originally they claimed that Just calling up volunteers and sending them into the South was an abuse of power. That the president did not have the power to send troops into states. Lincoln said, no, as commander-in-chief, it is my duty to maintain peace and tranquility in the country. As commander-in-chief, I have the ability to enforce that. But when the volunteers stop volunteering, Lincoln is going to issue a draft, a forced conscription. You are forced to go into the army against your will. And that is in the summer of 1863. How did people react to the draft in 1863? The same way they reacted to the draft in 1968. Riots, protests. Guys, anytime we've had a draft in American history, there have been people who have opposed and avoided the draft. In 1863, there were riots. There were people who paid other people to go in their place. If you had enough money, you could do that. If you had $300, which was a lot of money back then, if you had $300, you could pay like an Irish immigrant to go fight in your place. You could buy a substitute. During World War I, there was a draft, and people avoided the draft. During World War II, heck, that was a good war. We were fighting Nazis. People avoided the draft. There were draft protests. And certainly during the Vietnam War, there were draft protests. So, by and large, Americans generally don't like drafts. And you haven't had a draft in this country since 1971. Yeah. He didn't pay someone to go in his place. He dodged the draft. He avoided it. He tried to convince a senator, Senator Fulbright of Arkansas, he wrote him a letter and said, "Do you please find me a way to stay out of the draft?" So yes, he tried to use his connections to avoid the draft. Yes. I think George W. Bush avoided the draft as well. He joined the Texas Air National Guard, to protect Texas from invasion from Oklahoma. So, anyway, so you have draft riots. The South is also going to resort to forced conscription as well, and eventually, both North and, believe it or not, and South are going to resort to using blacks in their armies. The North does it in 1863. The South does it in 1865 when all hope seems to be lost. I mean, you're desperate when you're fighting to preserve slavery and you're asking slaves to fight for you. You've become desperate. People criticized Lincoln for his actions, his abuse of power. And the easiest way to criticize Lincoln was to claim he was black. Kind of today, the easiest way to criticize, he's a socialist, he's like a communist. No, he's like Hitler. And I love those folks on Fox News who use Hitler and communist interchangeably when they're at opposite ends of the political spectrum. We got it, man. Every president makes, decisions that you disagree with. But it doesn't mean that they're out there killing 6 million Jews, okay? So the easiest way to criticize Lincoln was to claim he came from African heritage. The rumor going around was that Abraham Lincoln's mother had shacked up with an escaped slave at some point. By the way, we all know what happened to Abraham Lincoln's mother. She was killed by a vampire, right? That didn't happen? Okay. But does anybody know, here's your trivia for you, does anybody know Abraham Lincoln's mother's maiden name? because there's a famous actor who's related to them. Nancy Hanks. Tom Hanks counts among his relatives, Abraham Lincoln. During the war, people deigned to criticize Lincoln and his war policy. These critics of Lincoln, a lot of them were Democrats, a lot of them were Northern Democrats, were referred to as copperheads. You all live in a rural area. What's the deal with copperheads?
Poisonous.
They're poisonous. What else is the deal with copperheads? Why is it easy to get bit by a copperhead?
They hide.
Because they hide in plain sight. They're there, but you don't see them. So the term copperhead is used for these Northern peace Democrats who want to compromise with the South and are trying to undermine Lincoln's war policies, trying to convince people not to go in the draft, trying to release prisoners. So what does Lincoln do to these copperheads, these Democrats? He arrests them, throws them in jail, like Clement Vallandigham. He was a copperhead peace Democrat from Ohio who criticized Lincoln during the war and was arrested and thrown in jail. And when he was paroled and went back to criticizing Lincoln, Lincoln had him exiled to Canada. Guys, can you imagine Obama exiling a member of Congress, a sitting member of Congress, for criticizing him? Good Lord, we wouldn't have any Congress people left. But Lincoln did it. So I ask, is this a violation of the Constitution? Arresting people, arresting political opponents, arresting copperheads, suspending habeas corpus, using troops, drafting troops. Does that violate the Constitution? But is it okay to do it? Well, he did it. That's true.
In hindsight, it paid off, but if you were living at that time, it probably would have been pretty much.
Yeah, that's a very nice, nuanced, well thought out answer. I oftentimes think, because I look back and I think Lincoln saved the Union. He's universally ranked as the #1 president in American history. But I look back and I think, if I were alive at that time, would I have supported Lincoln's actions? And I have a tough time squaring that circle. All right, we'll finish the rest of it next time.
What about the snow day?
Oh, if you have that snow day assignment, yeah, I'll take